welcome to another episode of 10x Marketer podcast. Today I have Stephan Bajaio with me. He is a seasoned SEO expert, and we discussed something that is bothering almost everyone: how SEO as an industry and how AI is going to impact SEO as an industry. Everyone is worried about that in 2025, how Google is going to lose the market share and how SEO has to struggle with the decreasing on organic traffic day by day. So these are some of the things that I discussed with Stefan. He is one of the experts in the industry. I personally follow and like the content that he shares. Very, very authentic voice in the SEO industry. And he was very candid in sharing a lot of things with his experience of optimizing content, SEO, and the things that are constantly changing in SEO industry. So you definitely love the episode. And before we jump in and listen to what Stefan has to share, I quickly request you to subscribe to the 10x Marketer podcast wherever you're listening from. We are available on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Gary. I'm excited to be here with you. It's a new year. I'm Stephan Bajaio. I am a former co-founder of Conductor, helped build that enterprise SEO and content platform for 14 years, then went off to be a CMO, so see the other side of the coin, at a software company for about a year and a half. And then decided to finally go do my first love or come back to SEO and ultimately start my agency in search and search intelligence called VibeLogic. So really excited to be here with you today, Gary.
Great, so awesome. And I think this is the first episode I'm recording in 2025, and we are at the 2nd of January. In respect to the transformation that an industry can go through in a smallest portion of time in my lifetime, what I've seen is what happened in last year and what is going to happen at least to the SEO industry. I mean, I've not seen that kind of transformation personally. Maybe I'm too young in my lifetime. Uh, and everyone is kind of confused, scared, worried, or excited about what is going to happen, how things are going to progress in, let's say, 2025 and beyond, at least for the SEO industry. Since you are one of the expert I personally follow and admire thought leadership, why don't you just give me some insights on how things are going to be according to you this year and years to come for the SEO industry?
Sure. So I'll caveat it first to say, as much as I've been in this industry for 2 decades, no one can really see around corners, but I have a pretty good track record of understanding where things may be going. So I'll do my best to share what I see coming, and then hopefully that helps people in terms of what they're taking on this year. First and foremost, SEOs have a tendency to get very scared very quickly of things, right? AI is clearly a change. We all know this. We've all understood this. But I think everyone needs to take a step back and realize what SEO is, right? Search engine optimization. And I don't really even like that term. I think it's a misnomer. It's not the correct name for what we ultimately do. But there is an aspect of that people need to remember, and it's the O, right? It's the optimization. Optimization, if it was always the same thing, wouldn't be very much to do, right? It would be the same tactic over and over and over again. And if it's just, we change our title tag, which, by the way, you still have to change your title tags, but you change your title tag and you expect that's it, then your value within an organization or to anyone is very limited. Optimization is a verb. It's an action, right? So we need to take action. We need to think about the actions, and the actions we need to take are changing. This is not new when you think about SEO. And I want to take us back because history, and Gary kind of called out my gray hairs here since he's talking about him being so young and not having gone through so much of this. But
No, I don't have beard. I'm not. I also have
gray
no
hairs,
white.
Gary. I have enough gray hairs for all of the algo shifts and the things that have happened over the past 20 years. But let's take a step back, right? there was a time and place where we had provided information. That was when Google was actually providing us the keywords that searchers were actually entering and the exact amounts, and those were going into analytics. And then that disappeared and the bottom dropped out, and we all got very scared. And we all said, oh my God, what are we going to do without this data? How will we survive? SEO is dead, because that's what everyone says every minute, right? And so we approached it that way. Then we were told, oh, look, there's AMP and there's Mobilegeddon, and this idea of MDOTs are going away, and now you're going to have to do adaptive and responsive, and all of these things would have to change. That was also scary. And all of a sudden we found ourselves in the corner going, oh my God, how will we do this? We need to convince people. Then there was caffeine and the speed of websites. Core Web Vitals would later come in, and we'd have to think about that. Then came EAT. Then came voice search, and everyone freaked out. Oh my God, voice search. And if you go back in time and look at some of my old stuff, I said, that's nonsense. The reason I said it was nonsense at the time was because it was a great way to give your query in, but it was a horrible way to get your query out. So actually getting the response in voice, you can read 5 times faster than you can hear. So that was really not that great a method of getting back the data from the search engine. Therefore, it didn't really work. And people were thinking about investing money into Amazon recipes and all sorts of craziness. And people were saying, oh, search is dead. We have to think about voice, and all the words will be different. Okay, so I've said a lot. My point simply is, it's an evolution. COVID was a great example of an evolution. All of a sudden, businesses got smacked upside the head because they had to, because a global pandemic forced businesses of all shapes and sizes to redefine what they were, and that their online presence was potentially even their entire business in some cases, or at least had to play a large portion in their business. Now comes AI, and everyone says, oh my God. And to me, all I'm hearing is an echo of the past. That doesn't mean AI is not going to shift things. It absolutely will. Mobile devices shifted things. All of the things I've discussed here quickly shifted things. The difference being, we need to think about the context of how, not necessarily, and the whys behind the how, right? That we believe AI will play a role in, right? And I think what we're not doing is looking at that, and people are just kind of like screaming and saying, oh my God, and the GPTs and all of these different things. I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on where I think it's going to go this year. Nobody can really know, but I'll give you some insights along the way.
Great. So, two things emerged out of whatever you have shared so far. First thing that comes to me and my mind is, you can address it if it is wrong according to my perception. Uh, so far, in all the transformation that we have experienced, none of that ever said that Google will not be the dominating factor. It was always SEO is dead, X is dead, Y is dead, but Google was always there as a leader. Like, it was Google. This is for the first time that most people are predicting, and even I've seen some data, that at least 20% of the search share will go to the answer engine in next 1 year. That is what people are predicting. Maybe it's something here and there, and maybe no
Sure.
credible information right now.
Great
That's
point.
one. The second point is, Bing was never, or any other search engine was never a competitor as such. So Google, in a way, trying to continue doing that duopoly kind of market, trying to pretend that there is another search engine, tried to give 10-15% market share to Bing, like in data at least. But most searches that happening on Bing was to go on google.com, right? So it was not exactly a search engine, it was kind of a transition from Bing to Google. But for the first time, people are seriously considering Bing as one of the other search engine. So, uh, do you really think Google's dominance is something that is challenged right now? And if that is the case, how the post Google world will look like for SEOs?
Great points. Okay. So your first point regarding, Google was kind of the leader, or actually it's your second point. It's kind of the leader, and we've not known a world where that's not the case. I'm going to kind of push back on that, and here's what it is. Google was, and then it wasn't. Amazon searches go on in Amazon and start in Amazon and finish in Amazon, and we don't actually quantify how much of that is taken away from Google. But that was something that, as it became more prevalent, as we got Prime, as people signed up for these kind of situations, Amazon's market share of actual search removed some. In addition, you had other services, and eBay was an example, and kind of Google then put eBay search kind of as part of their search and things like that. Google got into certain games to try and gain back the market share they were losing to groups. They were losing market share to job boards. That's why you see the search, their job search features that were inside of Google. You see they were losing it to travel with Expedia and others. That's why they started putting them in. So every single time you saw an innovation of Google essentially bringing in stuff into its universal and other aspects of its search, it was to a degree because it was losing it to these other groups where searches were happening, right? And those searches were always happening. It's just a question of whether or not they were showing up as MSV and search volume that was happening in Google first, or if they were just occurring somewhere on the web. And ultimately, so much of that, I would almost argue in many cases, was navigational in nature. People knew what they were looking for. They put in the brand, they put in the query, they put in even the long term, and they are just looking for the page to get to make the purchase. Those are a different kind of intent query, and I think we need to recognize that as an industry. So if you lose those, that's a different set. So now when you think about the idea of Bing and the GPTs and everyone kind of eating away at that market share, which I agree with you. And I think there'll be a bigger eat soon. And I don't mean eat as an EEAT, which is also a thing, and I think plays a much bigger role, and I'll explain why in a little bit. I think what we run into here is a situation where a lot of queries that the GPTs are going to take are going to be depending. Again, first you have to think about adoption rates. Second, you have to think about user experience, right? Some people are going to want to ask very long queries like I did. I actually asked ChatGPT over New Year's week or the week leading up to it. I had my family in from Montreal and my nephews and nieces, and so I said, what's a good thing to do in New York City this weekend for a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 4.5-year-old, boys and girls, from people from Montreal and I just, it was a mile long. I could just keep talking to it and ask it. Now, was that a query I would have put into Google? Maybe. Could that have been like 17 different queries? Possibly. Might those have led to some form of conversion? Doubtfully online, frankly, unless I was buying a ticket maybe for something. But even then, am I going to purchase that through ChatGPT? Not necessarily. Sure, Perplexity is now giving us the ability to make purchases through, but that is still very young and very early. And we also have to remember, I think it was the folks I was at Publicis the other day at a conference they were holding with Microsoft, and folks from Copilot were there, and they were talking about who are aged or like matured individuals in the space of GPTs and AI bots or LLMs, let's say, and people using them in July. And I think this conference was in August, or were considered to be new, and people that were in as of January were considered to be aged and old. And I'm thinking, January 2024, I've been using LLM since like 2023, early, maybe late 2022, right? So, that makes me ancient. Like I'm a hieroglyphic when it comes to actual AI. So, we have to remember that the adoption rate of these things is not us nerds out here who are like on the edge of tech. It has to become full-fledged adopt, meaning it has to be in people's everyday lives. And the adoption of how people use these tools and mechanisms will eat into the market share of Google. It will eat into the market share of search engines. But is that the market share we really cared about? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure that those are the revenue generating queries that we cared as much about. So it's not going to be as close to the cash register. It's going to be informational related terms, which means we are going to have to evolve. We are going to have to optimize. We are going to have to think about the idea that a user doesn't just start in search. Sometimes they start in an LLM. And here's where it's going to get way more interesting. I have the new Apple iPhone 16 Pro. Apple Intelligence, which I'm still not feeling it, but Siri does default now to throwing you over to ChatGPT, which I think is interesting. Meaning, will our virtual assistants take over a portion as they get smarter, right? And again, ChatGPT is not even a virtual assistant yet. We have to think about the idea of there will be a world, maybe this year, maybe in the next, that is predictive, not responsive. Right now, we're in the responsive world where you have to ask, right? Whereas if, let's say, Siri knows, or in Android, they know in my Google Calendar, I am going to meet Gary for lunch. He's flown into New York. We are going to go meet for lunch at a particular restaurant. It's actually in my Open Table app. It can understand the apps, and it says, hey, do you guys both have an interest in, I don't know, cars? There's actually a car show going on nearby. Would you and Gary want to go afterwards? That's something that will be predictive. It will be telling us and giving us the option. It will be telling us where we could park around the area. If we want to go to a sushi restaurant and this one we're going to be late to, it'll be able to tell us that there's an alternative for us. There will be things that we would have possibly searched, but instead will be done for us by the assistant. That will cut in, I want to say, more and in a less obvious way to where we would have had to done searches and gone through different apps and done different things, whereas the assistants will actually step in and take some of that off our plate. A proactive world is going to mean, because you have to remember, this is my big thing right now. I think we are coming to an inflection point as a society. Now I'm getting really big here, where the decision-making process is too heavy. There are too many decision-making points. Humanity doesn't want that anymore. Too much choice is not choice. It's actually problematic. It makes you feel like your opportunity cost is always too high every single choice you make. I have to go get a new washer dryer, and I'm dreading it because there are thousands, it feels like, of washer dryers and the best ones and who will do this and that. I want someone to make the decision for me, and I want to be able to trust the system that does to do it for me. That doesn't mean I do it blindly, but it does mean I want like 2 options, 3 options, and then I want to be done with that problem and move on with my life. I don't want that to take up a month's worth of research in figuring out in order to save a couple of dollars here and there. At some point, people are going to feel like that's too much. And I feel like we're getting to that point as a society. So anything, that's why we turned to search engines in the first place, right? So anything we can do to ensure that we are reducing the stress of our users and getting them an answer, not one answer, but a set of choices that then that feels curated to them and allows them to then make the call as to what they want, take action, and move on with their lives. Most people would be happy in doing that for 80% of what they're looking for on the web. And that's where AI is going to have to come in.
Yes, that's 100% valid point. And I think to add to that same point, if there is a search engine, be it an AI overview or a chat GPT engine, if it can answer the question there itself and I don't have to go through 10 different links, that also is a behavior we have been conditioned to for last 10-15 years with Google. And suddenly we realize that it's not necessary.
Yep. We do, but here's the thing, Gary, and I've thought about this, right? It was the idea of voice search. Voice search was problematic because it only really could give you one answer, because you had to wait to listen to the answer, and you couldn't listen to 10 answers, right? I mean, that was crazy. So choice was reduced to too few. The issue here is that we have to remember that there's a large swath of people that have never used an LLM. They're going to approach it the same way they did Google, which is they turn it into a deity. They turn it into God. They turn it into what it says is definitely the right answer, right? The number one result has to be the best because it's number one. And it's Google that tells me that, right? Okay, here's the thing. People over time realized that was not the case. They realized that Google wasn't omnipotent and that there was such a thing as SEO and that people were ranking things that are not right and that you actually had to do a little more work to find what you wanted. And, these were things that I would say were conditioned over time for people to understand. Now people are walking into GPT and there will be hallucinations. There will be crazy things it comes up with. There will be, so until a GPT starts giving you a trust level, like, hey, you're about to make this decision on a doctor or this or that, something important in your life. Until we're doing that and actually have some form of like, this is 50%. Now, if you make a decision on something you're being told is only 50%, then that's your right. That's great. You're deciding, I'm going to make a decision based on this. Wonderful. The problem is if you don't, if you don't have that to make that call, that this is only a flip of a coin's answer for you, you might make your decisions very differently based on the data. But no one's giving that back to you right now. You're just being given it back as kind of law. And I think people over time are going to get frustrated with that and say, like, I do want a certain amount of choice. Or what we're going to see is we're going to see these kind of LLMs coming out of something like an Amazon. Amazon should be producing its own LLM. Now, I know that kind of fights its own process because it wants to give you as much choice as possible because that is kind of their value proposition. But at a certain point, you might just want to say, I trust Amazon, Amazon's choice. Don't let me go through all the stuff to find what I'm looking for. Provide it to me quickly and easily. And because I trust the source, much like people trusted the Google results, then maybe that means we're good, And so I think what you'll have is you'll almost have branded advisors that are these LLMs. And I don't know that a Chat GPT or a Claude or a Perplexity end up being that. I think they'll power those things, but I don't know that they'll be that in of themselves. And so with that said, I still think there are things where the search engine is going to do a better job, especially in its display results and so forth. And I think video is going to have to get better incorporated into it, right? I think people want video more. I think more people are on their phones than ever. A TikTok style, we need to start thinking more like that, right? Especially if TikTok goes away this year, which is very possible in the US. I think we need to start thinking more of like, what is the way in which people want to get their information? And that needs to be decided by the medium, and the individual, not necessarily the company, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I think the fight will move to two sections, and both the fights will fought differently. One is for the organic information, that is like you serving an organic information, answering a specific question about anything. That's a separate fight. And then there is fight for commercial queries where people are spending money.
For sure.
So I think these are two different approaches. All the answer engine are getting better at the first part, which is giving you the information, but they are yet to evolve in the second part. There is no clear connection right now between an information served in a chat GPT kind of tool and it leading to a transaction. But that is something which is definitely going to happen because that's the natural next step for any AI engine.
Absolutely.
What I feel is there will be a lot more collaboration between e-commerce players and all the answer engines going forward. And there will be less interest in like really producing the organic information, because that is not serving anyone's purpose.
Well, I think it's going to matter in regards to, it's very much going to be about, you're right, the type of query. So if it's something that is low cost, low effort to use, and simple in its nature, something you know already, do you really need information validating why you're making the choice you're making in earlier stage content and all of that sort of stuff? Probably not. So that whole idea of having to build the buyer's journey for every product is not necessarily true, right? But you do have a group of people who may not realize that, you have to think about a buyer's journey in the way of, okay, there are people who are problem unaware. There are people who are problem aware. There are people who are solution unaware. There are people that are solution aware. And then there are people that are actually actioning off of those things, right? And so the question is, where essentially do you need to build the content to meet the user on that journey? Now, I'd say the more complicated, the more higher price, the more complex the buying decision, the usually that's associated with more money, right? Bigger things like buying a home, or these are going to require, even a car. These are going to require more research. And I don't know that getting that in a snippet from a chat GPT or something else is really ultimately going to be what you're looking for, especially not without that trust factor, right? Now, if Auto Trader or some other company that's in that space is giving it to you, and again, I even think people have become jaded. They understand that these companies are paid essentially like affiliates to give you one answer or another. I think the different like Consumer Reports and other types of companies now will have to rise up to be that trusted advisor that really doesn't get paid by anyone to play a role, but rather just you pay them to be the expert who then gives you the advice via this AI and mechanism, right? I think you're going to see more of that. I think you're going to see more of, first, I think we're going to have to, you're not going to see that in the first half, let alone maybe even in 2025, because the general populace has to start moving on to ChatGPT and then start seeing it's not necessarily giving them what they want. And then once they have that experience, then they'll kind of move over to wanting a curated, personalized version of something that's specific to them. I want Stephan Bajaio's, GPT that specifically focuses on my buying habits. My favorite colors, the things I like, you have a sense of what I bought, and you keep all of that in mind when you give me ideas for the next thing I want, right? That's actually an advisor versus like a cookie cutter templated thing. People who bought this also bought this. That is not what the average individual wants anymore, right? And we're starting to want more personalized, more curated experiences. We want them in our buying process. We want them in our research. We want them, which opens the door back to SEO to start thinking about optimization, not search engine, but rather data optimization. How do I take the data I have, right? This wonderful library of insight that my company's had by being around for 10, 15, 20 years in an industry, and without necessarily giving away my IP, structure that data in a way, shape, and form that can be consumed by these other engines, by these processes, by these mechanisms, by these partners, in a way that allows them to give a better answer that then I can be the solution to, right? So whether that's sometimes for the third parties or even my own experience on my own website, I don't want you to have to go through the search in the same way that you had to previously, or I recognize that, you know what, you're still trying to figure out what you want. And before I go off and tell you that I'm the end all be all, that's probably not the right approach. The right approach is to educate you as a consumer so that you are better served to understand the difference, at which point I will express why I'm one of the better choices, but that will be part of a process. I won't be banging you over the head with it at the wrong time. And that's what, most marketing has been, is just like, we're the best, we're the best, we're the best, we're the best, and here's why. Instead, it's going to be, have you considered these factors? Those factors will make you a better buyer, happier with the end all product you buy, and more likely to write a review, a positive review, be a happy customer, be a repeat customer, be all the things we want from a consumer, rather than just trying to hit them over the head with your marketing message and saying, oh, well, that was successful.
Yeah, I think the other problem that the buying mapping a buyer journey has is like you try to serve some organic content and then you think that in the long run the same person will come and convert with me, right? But the buyer journey is never linear,
So true.
and it's never something that you can map in a duration. Like you cannot say that for every t-shirt purchase people will take 5 days from
Right.
awareness to conversion, right? It can happen instantly, and people can take 6 months to complete that journey, right?
I'm so in agreement with you, because I've always believed, and actually something we've been building at Vibe Logic is this idea of like, people like to think about multi-touch attribution within their own websites. And even that, by the way, people have still not been able to get right when it's in your own universe. But the reality is that your own universe is only a moment in time in which the consumer is interacting and intersecting. The reality really comes down to this concept of like, they do a search wherever they do it. They get an opinion. They get a set of opinions. They get people who are this is the best product and this and that. And then they think, usually we hope, the consumer uses their brain and goes, well, I agree with that, or oh, this feels wrong, or this isn't right, or they have an alternative agenda or whatever. And they go, okay, I kind of like this. And then they do another query to kind of figure out some more stuff. Google has this 7-11-4 model, which I'm still trying to get my head around how it really works. But they say that you have to have spent 7 hours to build real brand affinity. You have to have spent 7 hours across 11 touch points over at least 4 different platforms to have built true brand affinity, which means you need to be along the way. It's a multi-channel approach that most companies cannot get their head around. And the reason why they can't get their head around this is because you can look at their marketing departments. Their marketing departments are siloed. They're structured so that each group has to do their own KPI, their own OKRs. They don't usually map up until you get to the VP or the CMO level, who frankly, here's a little secret, doesn't actually care which of the channels delivers, just wants the number, because they have to go to the exec team and say, here's what we brought from a marketing perspective. They're not going to go, SEO was the one who did it for me. Yeah, they might say that if that's what drove it, but ultimately they don't care whether it was SEO or email or display or PPC. They care that it got done, right? Now, in the meantime, when you go back into those channels, each of those channels is trying to deliver its own thing. PPC wants to drive more leads, and display wants to get more impressions, and SEO wants to try and get more touch points and traffic. And so the thing is, they're not all aligned. Sometimes they are. For a campaign, we're able to get them all to the table. But like, think about the content team, right? They need to build content for an email campaign potentially. They also have to do it for a page that SEO is asking for. They also have to do it for some kind of product page, right, that needs to then get created. And so what's happening there is this multi-channel aspect isn't aligned. And so when you think about what the journey is, I do a search in Google. I find a publisher. The publisher, I read the article. The article has a display ad, but it's got nothing to do with what I'm reading. Could have been an opportunity for display to have been there, but they're not. Then I go and, there's also an author associated to that. And that person's probably the next person who's going to review something, but PR isn't involved, so they don't know that. So this really high-ranking article that really has someone you should be going after from a PR perspective isn't even in the conversation. Then I do another query and I find a partner, right? And the partner could have had a logo for you if you were partnered with them that says you provide a product that works with whatever they have there. Again, not in the conversation. So there's all of these experiences that a user is going to go through. Oh, sorry. Then they find Quora or Reddit and they read about whether or not it's a good product or not. But no one is actually talking about the product that you were just trying to sell to them along the way, because you either didn't get your happy customer to go comment on Quora or Reddit, or your social team didn't play any factor in adding some buying help to a person. Not saying we're the best, just going in there and offering up some ideas. So now all of a sudden, like, all of these steps have been taken. The consumer feels better about their choice because they did their own research, but yet you weren't there along those pre-purchase processes to be that 7-11-4 kind of thing for them. And that to me is where we fall down. The larger the company, the less likely that is to happen, because that siloed aspect of marketing doesn't work together. They work separately. And so because the user doesn't follow one channel only, they go through multiple channels. Multiple channels have to be aware and helpful in that process. But that doesn't work with the direction most companies work their marketing in. So we are at odds in the way we market to the way the consumer actually consumes. And I don't mean that consumes like our product. I mean consumes the data that leads to decision making for the product. That's what's shocking to me. And we've actually built a process and methodology that we're turning into software at some point that allows us to be able to understand those different points I kind of talked about on a journey, and bring those back as a multi-channel approach so that individuals can actually go out as an org and say, I'm going to need to do a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here. Now the odds of me getting in front of the consumer that wants this is like 15, 20 times higher because I'm in the conversation more frequently. The concept is people are having conversations with your consumer and your audience no matter what. There is no answer on Google that doesn't respond with something. So the point is, you're either aware of that and using that to your advantage, or you're blissfully ignorant, in which case that ignorance is your competitor's market share.
True. I think one thing that I kind of not intentionally or unintentionally trying to do or have been doing is every time I make a transaction, I try to analyze my own buyer journey. And whenever I think of my own buyer journey, I always fail as a marketer in something that whether I could have designed something like that, whether
Yep.
I could have fulfilled the information that I was looking for when I'm doing it for my customer or for my own company. Can I design the same buyer journey? It's always comes as if I might have failed at multiple touch points.
The reality is, Gary, is that you couldn't. Neither could I, no matter what they are. And the reason why is because we're just fishing. Now, we could fish with a small net, one that's even big, but no larger than something we could bring back up on the deck of a boat or onto the shore, right? Okay. Or a fishing rod. How many fish can you catch with a fishing rod? It's got to be the right time, the right place. The fish has to be ready. The bait has to be right. Everything has to be right at that one moment that it crosses your path. A net, okay, the size of the net, the size of the fish, making sure the fish won't go through the net, the holes in the net, all that stuff. Okay. A trawler is what you need. Something that comes with a huge net and it picks up everything. It doesn't pick up every fish you want, right? It picks up animals that should never be caught in a fish net, right? The reality is that to create that kind of a dragnet, big, large situation is not something one person does. You don't go out, get a boat, get a huge net with those machines, run the boat at the same. Not one individual can't do that. It takes an entire team of people to go and fish that way. And if you're going to fish that way, you also have to be ready for the fact that there's going to be a lot of fish you have to throw back. There's a lot of things that are irrelevant and erroneous in doing that. It's not the best approach necessarily in all cases. It'll catch a lot of fish, but won't necessarily catch the fish you want. So, you have to decide where and how you want to deploy your fishing, so to speak, in order to catch the right fish at the right time and be there when they're there. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people aren't able to do. getting the entire group together to do it all at once is super hard to do, and it takes money and time and effort and discipline. Everybody's got to be at the dock at the same time. We all have to get on the boat. We all have to go together. We all have to know where we're fishing. We all have to know why. We all have to know lots of stuff goes on there. It's not easy. This is why it doesn't happen naturally. But for SEOs to sit here and throw a line in the water and say, oh, I'm going to catch fish, they're not doing it at any rate, usually, unless your products are $1 million products. But even those take a long time to reel in. And you won't be the only one using the fishing rod, right? You'll have to hand it off to sales, and you hope the fish doesn't come off the line. But the reality is, it's a process, and so you really do have to start thinking about what are the best ways of going out there and approaching this, especially as the landscape in the water changes, right? Maybe here's where we throw a net, and maybe here's where we put people with fishing rods, and maybe here's where we do trawling. It's not one solution, right? And so that's the thing we have to start realizing is the optimization is actually not for the engine. The optimization is for the organization, their data, their capabilities and resources, and deploying those in the most effective way possible to cross paths with the fishes you're actually trying to catch.
I think that's the challenge that SEO might have to solve in 2025 to stay relevant at least.
Yeah. The data is there. It's always been there. The difference is it hasn't always been leveraged. There is a
Yeah.
library of very valuable data sitting inside of everyone's company who's watching this right now that they have not leveraged. AI can help them leverage it. And I don't mean that as in let's create a bunch of AI content and slap that up on the web. There's a reason why Google's not going to make that rank, and they shouldn't. But there are ways to take that information and start saying, well, what are the commonalities here? What are things we can learn from this data? Have AI help you understand it a little better. Have AI help synthesize it for you. Have it try to compare audiences and their needs potentially against that data, and maybe think through different things you might not have thought of. So it's not a replacement, it's an enhancement, right? We need to first recognize that as marketers. You're not getting replaced by AI. You are hopefully recognizing where the endoskeleton can be used on your marketing brain and capability to make you stronger, faster, more efficient, able to think in different ways, see things you might not have seen because your mind was so focused in one place that you missed some of the peripherals that actually might be where you should be fishing. Things like that are more where I think AI is going to take the role. Also, convincing companies that they can't just slap things up with AI and throw them on the web is also going to be another thing that SEOs are going to have to fight to make sure the right things are done within their companies.
That's their life and blood. If they don't do that, then I mean they are doomed anyways.
True. Very
If
true.
the whole search engine is filled with garbage, then it becomes
More and
useless.
more so every day. And luckily, I will say this, as much as, everyone has a love-hate relationship in SEO with Google, I will say their decision not to let AI content rank right now makes me very happy, because I believe that we will lose facts possibly very quickly if we allow that to happen. So I'll quickly get into that because I know we're probably running up on time here. If a major company with a brand goes out and says something, let's go to the extreme. Let's say it was a hospital. And a hospital like Johns Hopkins or one of these major Mayo Clinic, one of the really large hospitals that everyone really trusts because of the name and what they've accomplished, goes off and puts something from AI up. That AI fact that they put up wasn't fact checked. Probably not at a hospital, but let's just say it happened. Okay, now Mayo Clinic or someone is saying something incorrect that it got from AI, but it published because someone didn't fact check it the way they were supposed to. But here's the thing, the LLM goes and looks at that ranking page that Google said is authoritative on this subject, and then takes that misfact and cites it as a fact in someone else's LLM. Now someone else takes that LLM and says, oh, well, if Mayo Clinic said it, then it's got to be true. And then they put it on their thing. And so now all of a sudden, if you start seeing that, by virtue, we lose our facts. We lose our reality. That's the most, dystopian kind of version of what happens here. But the reality is there is a danger to AI, especially in a time and place where we can't believe our eyes, we can't believe our ears. We're having trouble with disinformation and understanding what is true and what isn't. It would be really detrimental if Google or any search engine were to allow that to occur, because it really could erode trust in the long run, as well as spread a tremendous amount of disinformation simply based on the idea that if the people using this are trying to save time by using it and don't do the really time consuming fact checking of that information, you'll find yourself with a set of search results that are bogus, stating bogus things, and then confirming other bogus things over and over again. That's a world I don't want to be in. And frankly, I don't think any search practitioner wants to be in.
Yeah, I think we have seen a little trailer of that when Twitter launched it's the paid verification version, right?
Yep,
Some people took the verification in name of XYZ and posted things which kind of had the
absolutely.
misinformation war, right? Effects can be created, and if LLMs can push them to the real facts, then it's definitely a challenge. And the role of SEO becomes even more critical because that's where you are important. You have to do that fact checking.
Brands will matter more. True brands will matter more. If you want to be a brand and you want to say something, your authority is going to matter more in someone's eyes as that company, because it's coming from that company, that source. So if that is really not coming from that company, it's coming from an AI that frankly is trying to act as that company, Nike doesn't want the problem of saying something completely incorrect simply because a marketer somewhere in their company decided to use AI and then put out some fact about, you know, footwear or maybe feet in shoes, right? Ultimately, that then gets cited by 1,000 different companies out there, and then ultimately becomes complete falsehood. And some news company fact checks that. That's how stock prices start going down. That's how trust gets eroded. That's all the things they want to stay away from. So that's not to scare every company watching to say, don't use AI. It's just to say, don't replace your content creation with AI. Enhance it, but don't do it blindly. This is like, that's not, we're remember, in when it comes to LLMs, we're even earlier than the days of writing white text on a white background to try and rank in Google. Like, we're at the PBS version of that. We're at dial-up. Dee, 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 do, 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 bop, bop, bop. That's the version of AI we're using. So everybody better recognize that we're still very early days. Even though this sounds and feels a little magical, this is the very, very, very beginning of something that's far greater, and we need to recognize that before everyone starts changing all of their habits and all of their behaviors and all of their marketing. Easy, easy. Like, this will all happen. We need to watch how society reacts, how governments react, how marketing ultimately reacts to this, and not jump the gun.
And I think there is a major misinformation war or war against the misinformation that the brands have to fight because anybody can publish anything in the name of Nike, Adidas, or XYZ. And if
I
that becomes a fact, it would be very difficult for a company to counter that.
I was saying to my friends actually on New Year's, so I'll make this prediction now. It's the 2nd of January. 2025 will be the first time that a major crisis is doctored and or perpetuated due to AI. Whether it's a plane crash, an attack, some form of something, where all the sources of information that the traditional news organizations will have will actually be manipulated by AI in a way, shape, and form, whether that's because it's considered mass knowledge and all these people are talking about it, so it must be true and they must have experienced it, or um, or ultimately one group of individuals, like a group of hackers or whatever, will actively try to put across something that actually catches the mainstream, picks up, and so on, that will force the public to now think of AI in a different way. I think that will be a reckoning moment that individuals, the average individual who has no clue of this technology, will have to face in a more obvious way this year because of AI and video, because of all the advancements and how fast it's advancing. Um, the people looking to do harm are much more in tune with this technology than the people who are not. And so I think there will be something that occurs this year that will be false, that will force society to look at AI and decide uh, how and if we need to be putting more regulations and rules around it.
True. Thank you so much. I think we have already done 50 minutes of talking.
Definitely.
So it was definitely a wonderful chat. I didn't even realize we are already 50 minutes. I usually my episodes are around 40 minutes, but that's
Sorry. Well,
great.
it
No. You
happens.
don't have to be sorry. It's definitely a wonderful conversation. Otherwise, we could have
Well, it was a
stopped earlier.
pleasure, Yuri. Pleasure.
Thank you so much, guys, for listening to us so far. I'm sure this is a fantastic piece of information that Stefan has shared with us. Uh, Stay tuned and do subscribe to the 10x Marketer channel. I keep bringing guests like Stefan and bring you the greatest information on both SEO, PPC, and other areas of marketing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Stefan. It
Thank
was
you.
really wonderful talking to you.